All right. Welcome to another session of this class. This time I'm going to be talking about the herbs turmeric and wild lettuce, and I'm going to be talking about back pain. So I'm going to start off with talking about turmeric. Turmeric is Curcuma longa. It is one of a few species of curcuma, but it's the one that's most widely used in cooking and in medicine. It is both one of the most widely used therapeutic substances in the world and also one of the ones with the longest recorded history. So it's in the Rig Veda, which is one of the oldest documents that humans have written down that people still read. There are some Babylonian inscriptions that are probably older or whatever, but it's something that is still widely read and is part of the sacred literature of Hinduism. And it's a few thousand years old. It's hard to say exactly how old because there aren't, original copies or whatever, but it's a very old written text, and it mentions the use of turmeric as medicine and as a sort of ritual sort of thing. Although, of course, in those days, ritualism and medicine were not really reckoned to be separate necessarily. So turmeric's main thing that people use it for nowadays, and the thing that it's been most widely researched for, is as an anti-inflammatory. And most of that research is focused on a particular substance called curcumin, which gives it its yellow color. But that's not the only substance in it, and it's not the only substance in it that has anti-inflammatory properties. It's just the most abundant substance in it with anti-inflammatory properties. Probably the most abundant substance in it, other than water and cellulose, which are just kind of like the structure of the plant. So that's what most of the research is focused on. And it's a really good anti-inflammatory. It's a very uncomplicated herb as far as being extremely well tolerated. People can take enormous quantities of it without it causing any problems. At some point, after a certain dosage, it gets to where it can't be absorbed so well. Maybe is being excreted, still looking like it did when it was consumed, but it's possible to take just about any amount of it without causing any real problems. And I often give people turmeric tincture in doses from a teaspoon, which is 5 milliliters, up to, it's not uncommon for me to give somebody a tablespoon 3 times a day, which is 45 milliliters of it. So 45 grams or 45,000 milligrams, if you want to compare that to how a lot of other anti-inflammatory substances are measured in milligrams. So it's really good for joint pain. It's really good for inflammation in the organs, including the digestive system, and also including the respiratory system. And those are the main 3 areas of the body that I personally tend to target with this herb, are the joints, the lungs, and the digestive system, all of which are subject to various different inflammatory conditions. Let's see. As far as we know, curcumin works by it inhibits an enzyme. So an enzyme is a substance that makes a chemical reaction more easy to happen more easily. And curcumin inhibits the action of an enzyme called cyclooxygenase 2, which cyclooxygenase 2 facilitates the process of inflammation in the body. So it keeps it from being able to facilitate, from being able to help the chain reaction of chemical reactions that results in inflammation. And by doing so, makes it so that there is less inflammation. And kind of critically, it makes it so that there's less inflammation in a different way than steroids or steroidal herbs would. So there are a lot of substances, both natural and man-made, that inhibit inflammation by reducing immunity, by suppress immunity in general and inhibit inflammation specifically. And curcuma is not one of them. It's able to, and it's not unique in this regard, but it is an important thing to understand about it. It's able to inhibit inflammation without inhibiting immunity. So that's something that is pretty helpful if you want to reduce any sort of inflammatory response that's going on in the body, but you don't want to weaken the body's resistance to outside things, or if there is an infection that's part of why the inflammation is going on, you don't want to make it so that that infection has more free reign. So for instance, if someone has a respiratory illness and they've gotten some sort of a virus or whatever, and they're having, coughing, cold, shortness of breath, that sort of thing. If you were to give them a steroid like prednisone or a steroidal herb like Trillium, you might risk allowing the viral infection to get worse while you're treating the symptoms of tightness in the chest by reducing inflammation in the lungs. And if you do it with curcuma, you don't have to worry about that. So you're reducing that inflammation and allowing the immune system to also go about its business. And so that's a really helpful thing to have and a really helpful thing to know about this substance. Curcuma is also really good topically, and traditionally it's been used either as a powder or a paste, a powder made from the dried root or a paste made from the crushed up fresh peeled root, for all sorts of different skin conditions like eczema, acne, psoriasis, any sort of inflammatory condition on the skin. You can use this herb for it, and it will tend to reduce the inflammation. It will also stain the skin yellow, and the lighter your skin color is, the more that's going to show up. But that's temporary. It washes out or kind of fades away after a few days. So that's something that some people might find cosmetically not to be something they want, but if it's not for cosmetic reasons and it's just that the skin inflammation is bothering them and they want to reduce the inflammation, then it's a really solid choice. It will stain clothes though also. So that's something you don't want to unpleasantly surprise someone with. Make sure that they know. So the stuff that is in curcuma is very much water soluble. Well, let's see. It's not perfectly water soluble. It's fairly water soluble in hot water. So if you chop it up or grind it up and make a decoction of it, you'll get a nice deep orange, yellow to deep orange color. And that is the medicinal stuff coming out into the liquid. And if you make it in alcohol, if you're making it without heat, you want to use a higher concentration of alcohol, to at least 50% alcohol, to extract the good dark colored stuff from it. If you chop it up and put it in 20% alcohol at room temperature, you'll get a little bit of yellowness coming out into it, but you won't get a real strong tincture the way you want to. So, and if you make a decoction and then add the alcohol, it actually looks lighter afterwards than it did before you added the alcohol, which is kind of an unusual effect. There has been some marketing to the effect that you have to use curcuma with black pepper to make it more bioavailable. And curcuma and black pepper are both part of the native flora of India, and they both have a very long written history as medicinal substances in that part of the world. And sometimes they're used together and sometimes not. So it's kind of a modern marketing myth that you have to do it that way. It's I usually don't, because a lot of the time I'm using turmeric for gut inflammation, and I don't want to give black pepper to somebody with intestinal inflammation because it's irritating to the intestines. So, for joints, both of them are helpful, and they may be more helpful together than either one would be separately. But it's not necessarily the case based on a few thousand years of pretty well documented use. Not necessarily the case that you have to do something like that at all. So, like I said, I usually don't. Not that there's anything wrong with doing it that way necessarily, but it's not really something that you have to do. I often use turmeric in formulas with other anti-inflammatories. It's one type of anti-inflammatory. The Trillium is another type of anti-inflammatory. Wintergreen and birch and poplar and willow are together yet another type. So, excuse me. So they all have different characteristics, slightly different characteristics, and I use them all a little bit differently. But I often use them together because that way you get multiple different types of action working on the same problem at the same time. As far as
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So sorry. Would the fresh root have the same medicinal effects, or is decocting it or making a tincture better to pull out what you need and put it to better use?
It kind of depends on what you're doing with the fresh root. I mean, if you were like just eating the fresh root, you might not get everything out of it because it's sort of tough fibrous material. But you definitely can do it that way. Just slice off a piece of the root and chew it up and eat it. It has all the stuff in it. It doesn't, it's not, it's pretty digestible. It's not something where you have to, like for instance, oak bark, you really need to do something with oak bark because we're just not meant to digest bark. But turmeric is, you can use it either way, and it will work pretty well. I often use the fresh root in cooking, sometimes grate it into food, the sauces and things like that, or soups. So, you can do it that way.
What kind of ratio would you use for decocting it as far as fresh root to water?
I would probably use about an ounce of fresh root to a pint of water, something along those lines. Or, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the plant itself is it's very similar to ginger, which I think people are slightly more familiar with, but it's not truly a root. It's the underground jointed rhizome, which is like an underground stem, basically. And then it puts out little tiny roots when it's in the right conditions. And you can actually buy turmeric root from the store if you find it for sale fresh, and plant it in sand and put it in a water it and put it in a sunny space, and it will grow reasonably well. I've grown it in a greenhouse before, and I've grown it in these kinds of jars that I have in my clinic. Oh, where is it? This kind of jar that I have in my clinic that's layers of sand and soil and rocks. It needs really good drainage, and it likes to be warm and get plenty of sun. Really, probably more sun than it would get outside in Kentucky, except during the middle of summer. But if you plant it in a container of sand and grow it somewhere warm and sunny, you can actually harvest it and break off parts of it and put a little bit of it back, and it'll keep growing as long as you've got a bud on the end of the piece of rhizome that you're using for it to grow from. And the above ground part of the plant is sort of a grass-like leaf, sort of something kind of like irises or gladiolas. Looks a bit like that. I've never gotten it to flower myself, but the flower looks a lot like ginger. So it's it's definitely something you can grow if you want to grow. It's also very frequently available either fresh at kind of fancier grocery stores and dried in all sorts of places. So it's a very accessible, good plant to know about. Good, versatile, and very, very safe and very effective. It's also a little bit decongestant and a little bit promotes digestion. So it's got those and helps with the movement of fluids in the body. That's another minor effect that it has. So it's good for all of those things. Slightly, because it's a little bit bitter, works a bit on the liver. It does help promote the appetite a little bit. I've often used it in older people who don't have much appetite to try and stimulate a little more appetite. Yeah, okay. Full Circle Market in Winchester has it. Good Foods Co-op also has it in Lexington. Both sometimes grown, at least some of the time grown by local people. Let's see. So yeah, that's turmeric. The other plant that I wanted to talk about is wild lettuce. Excuse me. Wild lettuce is essentially the same plant as tame lettuce. There are a few different species of wild lettuce. The genus is Lactica. We've got Lactica biennis and Lactica canadensis, which are native here. We've also got Lactica cereola, which maybe isn't native here. And Lactica sativa, which is basically garden variety lettuce, which might be the same species as Lactica cereola. So lettuce is a member of the same family as dandelions, and it has toothed leaves, sort of like a dandelion's leaf, except instead of just growing in a rosette on the ground, they grow up a stem, and they have a branching stem with many dandelion-like flowers. And just like dandelions, when they go to seed, they're little white blow balls that where each little tuft of fluff has a seed attached, and they blow around on the wind. And once you learn to recognize this plant, you'll find that it's very common in the summertime in this part of the country and in many other parts of the world as well. It will grow in cracks in the sidewalk. It will grow in gardens, flower beds, basically anywhere those little floating seeds can land. That they're pretty happy to start taking off. There is another plant that looks like it called sow thistle, and sow thistle is starts blooming a little bit earlier in the year. So a lot of the time, if people are looking for wild lettuce, they'll find sow thistle first. But once you get to know the two of them, you can tell them apart. But they definitely look like they're siblings. You know, they're closely related plants. Well, not super closely related plants. They're so in the same family, and they are just kind of similar in their structure. But the sow thistle does not have the medicinal properties that the wild lettuce has. So, and by the way, if anybody wants to see it, I made a video that's 20 or so minutes long that is on my clinical herbalist YouTube page that has that's all about wild lettuce. And you know, if you ever want to go and watch that, it's on there. But to kind of give a general overview of what it is and how to use it, wild lettuce is slightly sedative and it is somewhat pain relieving. So it is, if you make a tincture of the plant, it's a pretty mild remedy. And the actual amount of strength differs quite a bit from plant to plant. So it depends on growing conditions, and it also depends on genetics. So there's a lot of variation within the species as far as how medicinal it is, how strong it tastes. Good quality wild lettuce is grown in full sun and is intensely bitter. And it will often have a reddish tinge to the leaves, which means the reddish tinge is something that comes out when it's getting plenty of sun. It starts producing this secondary photosynthetic type of structure inside its cells that's purple instead of green. So a lot of plants do that. So yeah, good quality wild lettuce will be really bitter. It contains latex that leaks out when you injure the plant, when you cut the leaf or the stem. And if you make a tincture of it, like I said, it's a fairly mild remedy. It's maybe, as far as its sedative properties go, right around the same strength level as chamomile. Not a lot stronger and not a lot weaker than chamomile. Maybe a bit stronger if you're using really good quality lettuce. The pain relieving properties. Sorry. Okay. I just got a weird notification from Zoom. Hope everything is working okay. Anyway, the pain relieving properties are pretty different than those of willow or turmeric or anything like that. It works on the pain response. So it makes it so that people are less bothered by the pain. It doesn't necessarily make the pain go away. It makes it less distracting or annoying or severe, which is sometimes very helpful. So, you know, I often would use it. If I were using it for pain, I would use it along with other things. Besides making a simple tincture of the plant, the above ground parts of the plant, there's also a tradition of making a remedy from the latex itself, which is a more concentrated form of it. This is called lacticarium. Sometimes it's also called lettuce opium. It looks and feels a bit like opium because it's made, excuse me, because like opium, it is made from the milky latex of a plant and collected by cutting the plant. So what you would do with lettuce to make this is you would cut the stalk near the top of the plant, and a little drop of the white sap would accumulate, and you would scrape that off with a knife. And then you'd make another cut, and another little bit of it would accumulate. And you'd keep doing that until you had as much of it as you wanted to. And it's a very painstaking process. The same latex is in the whole plant if you make a tincture of it. but this is a more concentrated form of it. So if you wanted to make a more concentrated medicine, this is one way that you could do it. This product has either been tinctured or occasionally it's been smoked. But if you're smoking it, you have to smoke it with something else because it won't stay lit on its own. It won't really burn on its own very much. It's just like a sticky gum. So it's not really a way that I would try and have anybody use it, although it is something that has traditionally been used in that way. Okay, the way I said to make it more intense is rather than tincturing the whole plant, is to just tincture or collect just the sap, which you do by cutting the top of the plant, allowing a bead of sap to accumulate, and scraping that off and keeping it, and then cutting the plant again a little bit further down, letting the bead of sap accumulate and scraping it off, and so on. And so if you make a tincture of that, it is pretty strongly sedative and pretty strongly pain relieving. It's not in the same sort of weight class as opium. It's not that. It's not something where you could give it to someone and then, you know, cut their arm off, which people used to do with opium gum all the time. But it is something where you can help someone to sleep in spite of very serious injuries or pain, for instance. It does not contain morphine or codeine or anything that appears to be very structurally similar to them. People have tried to identify something like that in lacticarium, in the lettuce latex, and it doesn't seem to contain anything like that. It's a little bit unclear exactly what substances it does contain that make it do what it does, but not those, because those are pretty readily identifiable alkaloids, and it doesn't seem to contain them. So, and it doesn't make people fail drug tests for them either, which is something that people always ask about. So it's pretty good stuff. Here in central Kentucky, it was a cottage industry at one time. The Shakers, who had a commune 2 counties over, Shaker Village, as it is called, they had a business making this stuff and selling it to pharmacies all over the country. So it was a very popular remedy. I think the first place that I ever heard about the medicinal properties of lettuce was in a book called The Flopsy Bunnies by Beatrix Potter, where some of the rabbits eat lettuce and they fall asleep, and she mentions that lettuce has a soporific quality to it. So she was a botanist and scientific illustrator who knew a lot about plants, a lot about lichens, and was very involved in the early days of the conservation movement in Great Britain. So even though, of course, she's famous for and mostly remembered for her children's books, she actually did a lot of other interesting stuff too, and was a really interesting and intelligent person. So let's see. Yeah, with wild lettuce, I have sometimes, I used to especially sometimes use wild lettuce as a substitute for prescription pain medicines for people who were trying to quit them, but who needed them for other things. And it helps with that. It's not the main thing I use now, but it's definitely something that's readily available that you can find in just about any overgrown space that hasn't been treated with weed killer during the summertime. And you know, it's useful for relieving pain, and for helping people to sleep, and for calming the nerves even. So it's a good plant. It's like, I would say, because it is mood altering, because it is sedative, it's, I try not to give people things that are going to make them feel weird as much as possible. But for people who are very high strung, it might actually make them feel less weird than they do at baseline. So in some people, it can be a really good thing to take for pain and to help with sleep when there is pain and discomfort. For some other people, it might not be the ideal thing. So I hesitate to overhype it, because a lot of people do overhype it. A lot of people say that it's, uh, you know, that it's like opium or something like that, which, it has some similarities and it has some differences, some very important, very pronounced differences, but it is in a similar form as well. Yeah, this question of, can you put the latex on warts and it makes them go away? That will work with just about any kind of plant latex. You can do it with dandelion latex, and or rubber tree latex or whatever. And it will just kind of, basically what it does is it locks in the moisture from the skin and makes the wart get really damp, and then it starts to break apart. Yeah, milkweed also has the same kind of latex. So pretty much any sort of plant latex will work for that, including wild lettuce. When I was a kid, we called the dandelion sap Banya Kik An, which means bird's breast milk. I don't know why we called it that, but that was like the name for it. But it was something that, we were aware of as a remedy for warts, which are a frequent thing that children get on their hands and things because their skin's so thin, and also because everybody gets exposed to the viruses that cause warts, and usually they get exposed to them as children, and then by the time they're adults, their immune system have suppressed those viruses. So let's see. All right, so the other thing I wanted to talk about today is, back pain. Back pain is a really common health scenario, one of the most common things for people to seek healthcare for, just like headaches, which we talked about before. It is a multi-system thing. Most notably, it involves the skeletal system, including the bones and joints of the spine. It includes the musculature that attaches to that, and it includes the nerves in the spinal area. So there are all sorts of different causes of back pain, and all sorts of different presentations of back pain depending on what structures are most affected. So most people experience some back pain in their lives. Something like 4 out of 5 people experience some significant degree of back pain at some point. People categorize back pain as chronic back pain if it goes on for more than 3 months. So that's a very common complaint as well. And it's a complaint that affects a lot of people in a really broad range of the adult population. So what I mean by that is, for instance, it's not exactly consistent across socioeconomic strata, but poor people who work rough jobs are a little more likely to have chronic back pain than wealthier people who don't work physical jobs. People who are older are significantly more likely to get back pain. If you look at people who are, for example, from their early adulthood to their mid 40s or so, they're a little bit less likely to have chronic back pain than older adults, but not immensely less. It's not like it's triple or anything like that. It's not even double. It's just a bit more in older people because there's more time for wear and tear. So sometimes back pain stems back to a specific incident, like a car wreck or a fall, and sometimes it does not. A lot of the time when people have back pain, they'll go in and get some imaging done, some x-rays or MRIs or whatever. Sometimes those will show something. For example, inflammation of the spine, spondylitis is a pretty common finding that you can see on diagnostic imaging. But a lot of the time there isn't that. A lot of the time there's not anything that necessarily shows up on imaging. A lot of people, for a lot of people, back pain leads to them getting prescribed painkillers and then becoming addicted to those painkillers. That's a very common story of how people become. When I talk to people who have become addicted to pain medicines or develop problematic habits with using them, that's something that I hear very often, that it started out with back pain and a diagnosis related to back pain and a short course of things that led to addiction. Also, I've heard from a lot of people who didn't have that issue that they were presumed to because they presented for back pain at a healthcare facility. They come to the hospital and say, my back really hurts, and people immediately start thinking, oh, you're a drug seeker. And so that is a source of frustration for a lot of people. That is a source of alienation from the healthcare system for a lot of people, because like I said, back pain is one of the more common complaints out there, and it's one of the probably top 2 or 3 reasons for people to seek out healthcare. A lot of people go to chiropractic care for back pain. Those people tend to report a little bit more satisfaction than people who don't. So there's definitely some really good room for physical methods, things like chiropractic, stretching, yoga, physical therapy, heat, stuff like that for helping to improve back pain. As far as herbal medicine goes, my usual strategy when I'm working with back pain is to start off by trying to reduce inflammation and pain, and then seeing where we're at. Like, I'll usually have somebody start off with a combination of different well-tolerated anti-inflammatories, like, for instance, ginger and turmeric. Those are a couple that we've talked about before. And I might give somebody both of those together and then do that for several days and then see where things are at. Sometimes they feel much better and you can just stay with those sorts of things. Often back pain is a self-perpetuating type of situation, or it's something that's a result of just having to use your back and having to live your life. And so, for example, if somebody has a lot of pain that's from a muscular cause, from wear and tear to the muscles of the lower back that hold the spine upright, then anytime they're moving around and doing stuff, they might be exacerbating that. So it can be very hard to get it to go away. By contrast, if it's mainly a matter of inflammation of the spine and the joints in the spine, usually rest will make it worse and exercise will make it better. Or rest might not make it worse, but it won't make it better. It won't help, but exercise does. So if exercise helps and rest doesn't, then that's almost definitely an indication that there's inflammation in the spine, in the vertebrae and the joints between them. If rest helps and exercise makes it worse, that usually means that that it's more muscular than being a matter of skeletal inflammation. Ooh, ooh. All right, so in both of those cases, working on inflammation is going to help. In the case of the muscular stuff, stretching and heat will help a lot. Heating pads can be useful, whether they're electrical or whether they're a bag of rice heated up, or a hot water bottle, something like that. Heat can be helpful. I often do moxibustion on some points along the spine and along the muscles on either side of the spine, and that can be helpful. Nerve pain is often involved too, and that often feels like shooting pain or shocky type pain, and sometimes it feels like numbness in the extremities, especially the feet. So if somebody can't feel their feet, or can't feel their feet some of the times, or if they're having shooting pains going down their legs, a lot of the time that involves a nerve that is inflamed or compressed. So that's another area of concern, another type of issue that goes along with back pain. With that, stretching is sometimes helpful because it can be a compression that's caused by a nerve being squeezed by a muscle, and heat can help with that too. A lot of the time, with that sort of thing, I would work on something that would increase circulation as well. That's often helpful when there's impingement of the nerves, is to increase the circulation to the area, and then sometimes the other problems will sort of balance themselves back out. Let's see.
Would cayenne oil on the area help with that possibly?
Yeah, cayenne oil can be very helpful for back pain. Often I will make cayenne oil and some wintergreen salve mixed together. So you get the heating part of the cayenne and the cooling part, or the anti-inflammatory part of the wintergreen or poplar bud or something like that. But a cool and hot remedy mixed together. And the area that I would apply that on is all the way from the top of the pelvis across the back in sort of a triangle up to the point where the spine joins the rib cage. So that's called the costovertebral angle, the place where the rib cage meets the spine. And there are some muscles called the quadratus lumborum that kind of form a triangle. They go down from that costovertebral angle down to the top of the pelvis. So I would often coat that whole area in a warming ointment, or possibly a warming and cooling ointment. And that heat often feels really good for lower back pain. For upper back pain, you can kind of do the same thing, but you would do it either basically like along the neck, or the space between the shoulder blades and the spine. It's a different set of muscles, but a set of muscles that often aches and hurts from people being in the hunched over typing on a keyboard type of situation, or from various injuries. If somebody's at some point in their life has had whiplash or been punched in the jaw or something like that, it can actually have a lasting effect on how those muscles feel and how they, can cause small tears and things like that, but they never completely heal. So sometimes people get chronic pain as a result of that sort of thing. And sometimes they get temporary pain as a result of it as well. But yeah, warming salves can be wonderful for that. If somebody doesn't tolerate the heat of something like that, just plain castor oil can be really helpful too. It's very mildly warming, but the warming effect lasts a long time and it doesn't usually burn anybody, which cayenne does for some people. Also, with cayenne, you have to kind of be careful about a particular scenario, which is that if someone is doing something that makes them very sweaty, then you run the risk of the sweat running down their back and down into their butt crack and sensitive areas and carrying the cayenne there and making it burn. So that's something you want to try and avoid. So, not necessarily the best thing to do if somebody's going to be sweating profusely for whatever reason. But usually it's a pretty helpful thing. And often that can be combined with physical heat from something like a heating pad or, like I talked about, moxibustion. That's a really helpful thing for that area, for the back pain. I also do cupping on lower back pain, on the muscle, lower back pain that seems to be primarily muscular. In other words, that has either been suddenly brought on by overworking the back, or that has been, or that is just something that is made worse by work, gets better with rest. So rest is a really good option if you have it. And cupping is a situation where, let me show you this out here. Have these little glass cups and put alcohol inside it, light it on fire with a lighter or a match, and then put that on the skin, and it creates suction that creates a suction mark type of, like a little suction bruise. But doing that on the same area that I described, the quadratus lumborum area, and along both sides of the spine, that can really help with low back pain as well. Especially, like I said, if it's muscular, it often gives very immediate sort of relief that lasts for several days. So that's something that, takes a little bit of training and practice to get to where you can actually do it without burning the person or hurting them or having the cup just fall off because it didn't get on right. But once you get the hang of it, it's a really useful treatment and a really good service to be able to provide to the people close to you. And in some parts of the world, these are something that every family would just have and use for conditions like that, and for other things as well. They're good for breaking fevers as well. But and people think of it as being something in Chinese medicine because Chinese medicine uses it, but it's also very common in traditional medicine of Eastern Europe. Hippocrates mentions it in ancient Greek medicine, and it's been used throughout Europe, especially from medieval times to early modern times as well. Yeah, I definitely think that if during the weekend intensive we can do a cupping and moxibustion type of workshop, I think that would be a really, or maybe two separate sections, one on each. But I think that would be a really useful thing for people to know. This is a really good thing to do hands-on to get used to doing it. And it feels a little bit daunting at first because you're lighting something on fire and then putting it on somebody's skin, but it hardly ever goes badly. When it does, somebody gets maybe a little blister that's about on the same order that they would get from new shoes or something. So it's not generally going to cause any sort of terrible injury. So yeah, that's one treatment that I like pretty well for back pain, actually. So often, like I said, when I'm starting out working with back pain, I will be initially working just in general to reduce inflammation. And then after the inflammation has been reduced, it's often easier to tell what makes it worse and what makes it better. Sometimes before you do that, it's just kind of like it's terrible all the time, and it's hard to tell why it's terrible. And like I said, if they go and get some diagnostic imaging, if they have access to that sort of care, maybe it'll find something and maybe not. It's very, very common for people to be told that there's nothing wrong with them, even though they're in excruciating pain. And then once you figure out, what's making it better and worse, you can use that to guide your judgment of how to further treat it, whether you want to use warming things, for instance, or cooling things based on whether warmth or cold might exacerbate it or might alleviate it. Another thing to be aware of about low back pain is that it is pretty significantly tied to people's emotions. And that's sort of a chicken or the egg type of paradox. It can be kind of hard to sort out whether people are feeling low back pain because they're storing emotion in their lower back, or whether the back pain is affecting how they experience the world and making them feel certain types of emotions. And I suspect that both things do happen. But people's lower back is part of how they brace themselves. So if someone is constantly stressed, if someone is constantly bracing themselves, then that's going to wear on their lower back muscles. There has been at least one study where they asked people with back pain about their emotions and compared them to people without back pain. And people with back pain had more of a tendency to feel worthless, to feel hopeless, just to have a very negative experience of the world. And in a way that is not necessarily what you would see with other forms of chronic pain, even, which suggests that that the feelings are contributing to the physical outcome. That part of the reason that people are feeling back pain is because they feel bad, and that's how it's showing up in their body. So that's definitely something that people is something that's worth talking to people about, whether they're feeling like they're carrying too much weight, metaphorically speaking, whether they are feeling like something is hopeless, or whether they're feeling unvalued or anything like that. That could be a source of back pain or an exacerbating feature of back pain. Yeah. So yeah, after you have figured out what seems to be the main area, whether it's nerves or what sort of mixture you have of nerve involvement, muscular involvement, and skeletal involvement, then you want to try to tailor the treatment plan accordingly. So we know that when there's muscular stuff going on, you often want warming. When there's muscular pain, you often want warming to help with that. We talked about viburnum last time. That is a warming, good medicine for the muscles, something that helps to relieve cramping. and excessive tension in the muscles. Valerian is also something that might help in that scenario. It's not really warming, but it is helpful for the muscles. Cayenne, topically or internally, is a warming, pain relieving type of thing. It is often very helpful for back pain. When it is more a matter of skeletal, well, ginger is also something that's helpful with that. Ginger helps with skeletal and muscular pain. Turmeric helps with both also, but I would say more with the joint pain than it does with the muscle pain. With the nerves, that's a little bit harder to treat. I really like oil extract of usnea as a topical, as an internal remedy for when there's a lot of nervy type pain. So that's, you know, something you might be thinking of. There are also some herbs like nettle and passion flower that and skullcap that help with strengthening the nerve function, kind of nourishing the nervous system. Bacopa is another one that I use for that. Centella is another one. Those are all good herbs to use if there's nerve involvement. Like I said, stretching and heat are very good for muscle and nerve issues. If there does seem to be a strong emotional aspect to it, you know, something like chamomile or tulsi might be helpful for that. Valerian sometimes helps with that as well, although valerian is something I would reach for more if somebody is having very pronounced changes in their emotional state, not just like if they're gloomy all the time, but if they're, you know, going from feeling normal to having bouts of feeling hopeless. Valerian is often helpful for that. Helps people from having as big of a crash off of that sort of thing. The other thing, or another area to think about, is sleep, and whether the person is sleeping well and whether the place where they're sleeping is suitable for them and it is something that is able to allow them to get good sleep. So a lot of the time in older people, sleep is really terrible. You know, they just can't get comfortable. A lot of people sleep sitting up because of breathing difficulties, because of sleep apnea. A lot of people have, you know, maybe furniture that's kind of worn out or whatever. And that can be a contributing factor. So, you know, counseling people about this, you might not be able to do much about it, but you can at least let them know that, yes, having a lumpy old mattress can definitely contribute a lot to back pain. Along the same lines, shoes are hugely important. If somebody does not have good shock absorbent shoes, especially the heavier they are, it's going to make it much more likely for them to have back pain, because if you don't have shock absorption in your shoes, you'll feel it some in your heel, but you're going to feel a lot of it in your lower back. And it's definitely possible to have somebody go from feeling like their back is irreparably harmed to, you know, feeling immense relief from that just by getting new shoes, getting shoes that have some shock absorption, maybe some inserts in them that are shock absorbing, although putting inserts in shoes that are too worn down doesn't really help. But a lot of new shoes even don't have very good shock absorption, especially women's shoes. Athletic shoes are usually good. Dress shoes are usually bad. The more inexpensive a shoe is, the more likely it is to be terrible for your lower back. Generally speaking, I'm sure there are some very expensive dress shoes that are still terrible for your lower back, but but that's something to be really aware of, and that's, you know, an area that can very easily affect the back, and you know, can make a huge difference just by having the right equipment there. Um, and of course, whatever kind of repetitive movement that someone is doing, any kind of movement that they're doing frequently, whether it's, you know, bending over and picking things up, or whether it's sitting sitting at a desk that's where they're kind of bent over it or something like that, that can make a huge difference in the back pain that people are feeling. And sometimes just taking a break from that is the only thing that really helps. Sometimes, you know, sometimes people have to change jobs because of back issues. uh, Missing work because of back issues is actually one of the more common reasons that people call into work. So that's a thing too. um, yeah, walking barefoot, I find the same thing. I find that walking barefoot on the grass is really helpful. Um, you know, it's soft. It's kind of more how people are meant to walk, and of course, this time of year, you know, it has its own uh, downsides to it. But for the most part, you know, being barefoot can be really helpful. Um, or wearing shoes that don't act like a cast. A lot of shoes, really most shoes, act sort of like a cast in that they keep your foot from being able to move through its normal range of movement as you're wearing it and walking with it. Um, and that can affect not only the muscles in your feet and your legs, but also the ones further up that are, you know, helping, because those lower back muscles help to control balance and help to keep you upright, which is, you know, a very important part of being able to walk. Just a moment, I'll be right back. All right. So let's see. So, so yeah, so there are anti-inflammatories. Um, Nutritionally, if somebody has back pain, it's important for them, or it's helpful for them, generally speaking, to eat warming foods and to get plenty of protein, because there's often a muscle recovery issue where the muscles are not able to repair themselves adequately, and having plenty of protein helps with that. Um, and really, uh, any kind, I mean, eating a balanced diet is generally going to be really helpful for just about anything. But if it's something like a slow injury, making sure that you're getting plenty of good fats for your nerves, good protein for your muscles, and minerals for your bones is really uh, an important thing to be aware of. Uh, Also, antioxidants are really important, and avoiding inflammation promoting things in the diet, which would include sugar and especially alcohol, because alcohol is really uh, terrible for muscle recovery, terrible for joint pain. It's dehydrating. So, avoiding that completely, uh, or as completely as is practical, at least being aware that it's likely to have a negative influence is important. And being adequately hydrated is really important. So those are all some, dietary considerations. As far as lifestyle goes, exercise is really good for back pain. Uh, Impact is really bad for back pain. So um, swimming is good. Biking can be good if the bike is something that fits them well and everything. Running and jogging are usually pretty terrible. Um, Strengthening the core, strengthening the abdominal muscles is super important. I would say that it's probably the most important thing as far as exercise goes, is you want those abdominal muscles to be strong and to be bearing most of the weight of staying upright. Because if those muscles are engaged and strong, they're doing a lot of the work of holding you up. And so your back doesn't have to. And that's kind of how people are sort of meant to operate, is to have the muscles be holding up most of the weight, and the spine is there to give some support. But if you're just sagging onto your spine and having it hold all of the weight, eventually it's going to put a lot more wear and a lot more stress on it than if you're in an upright position. And also, if you're in an upright position with your core muscles engaged, your spine is going to be in a much better position than if you're sagging, if your body's just kind of sagging down and hanging by your spine. So it's so strengthening the abs is really useful, really important. You don't want to do sit-ups because those are hard on the back, but even just like engaging those muscles while sitting up straight, or planking, uh, or yeah, just working those muscles in whatever way works for you. But you don't want to do something like sit-ups that hyperextend the back, because that puts more pressure on the discs. And those used to be a very popular exercise, but they're not so highly recommended anymore, just because of what they do to people's lower back, lumbar spine, and the discs in particular. So avoid that one, but try and strengthen those muscles. And like I said, hydration is really important, because if you're dried out, then those sorts of things aren't going to the joints aren't going to be well lubricated, and that's going to be more wear, and the muscles are going to be more likely to cramp up, and that's going to be more pain as well. So, uh, let's see, where was I? Yes. Okay. Uh, so generally speaking, you want to take the approach of decreasing inflammation and then reassessing, figuring out what specific structures and functions in the back are needing additional support, and then work on the nervous system, the musculature, and the skeletal system in that area. Demulcent things sometimes help with back pain if there's joint pain. Uh, Herbs like seaweed, for instance, sea moss sometimes is helpful for that as well. And that just seems to be partly based on it helping to increase the lubrication in those joints. And fats are very good for that same sort of thing as well. In some cases, depending on how long the pain has been going on, how long the injury has been going on, there can be very different levels of physical damage, and the amount of pain is not always directly proportional to the amount of physical damage. So, for instance, I have known people who were having relatively minor back pain and who went in and got it checked out and found out that they had multiple fused vertebrae, where the discs between the vertebrae had completely eroded away and the bones had fused together because it had been bone on bone for some time, and those bones had just grown together. And I've also known people who were just in excruciating pain, who didn't have anything that was physically visible on an X-ray or an MRI. So it's extremely it's extremely nonlinear as to the relationship between the physical damage and the amount of pain that someone is in. I mean, on the whole, someone with more physical damage is likely to be in more pain, but it's not a reliable indicator. I think that it is important when if somebody comes to you for help with back pain, that you do take it seriously, that you take them at their word. You know, they're not coming to you for prescription opiates or anything like that. So, you know, that kind of eliminates what for a lot of practitioners is a source of frustration. For a lot of conventional practitioners, a source of frustration and distrust and alienation from their patients. And I don't think I've ever had anybody come to me and say, hook me up with some of that California poppy or something like that, where I was suspicious that they weren't really in pain. But generally, you know, it's important to believe them and validate their experience. That's a really helpful thing. Pain is not a measurable thing, so you know it's a very subjective experience, and partly because of marketing by the people who introduced oxycodone onto the market, partly because of that, their marketing, pain has come to be viewed as a vital sign and something where, you know, people will often ask, if somebody goes to a conventional practitioner, they'll ask them, how would you rate your pain on a scale of 1 to 10? And, you know, record that as though it were a similar type of measurement to heartbeat or blood pressure or something like that. But you know, that's not really very scientific. It's you know, lots of people, when they're in the moment, when they're in their pain feels all consuming, and so they're not really able to compare it to other instances of pain. Or you know, maybe it is the worst pain that they've ever felt, but maybe it's completely different than the worst pain that some other people have felt. So you know, you can't really measure it, you can't really quantify it in any readily available way that is reproducible and makes sense. So, uh, it's, it's just sort of a subjective experience, and nobody knows better than the person suffering what kind of pain they're in. So, trying to validate their pain, trying to uh, give some reassurance can really be helpful too. Because a lot of the time people feel sort of at sea with this, that they'll might be in pain. They might have been told that there's nothing that can be done for them. So trying to reassure them, trying to let them know that there are things that you have that usually help with back pain, can often be really helpful. Because, like I said, it is often does have an emotional component to it, and so making people feel better is a huge part of giving ease. Is a huge part of what we do as herbalists. So that's something to keep in mind with this condition in particular. And yeah, a lot of the time, if something has gone on for more than 3 months, a lot of the time there is something physical that is, measurable and maybe difficult, if not impossible, to completely repair. Um, this going on with their body, but it can be hard to find that, and it can be, sometimes people will go and get some sort of imaging done, and it won't find anything. And a lot of the time that actually just means that it's muscular, because most diagnostic imaging is not going to image muscle pain. It's going to image changes to hard structures like bone. It's going to image the presence of fluid or something with a different texture than what's normally there, but it's not going to tell you this muscle hurts. It's not going to tell you this nerve hurts. So, differentiating that based on nerve, based on shooting pain for neuralgia, or numbness for neuralgia, or paresthesia, which is just kind of like weird feelings that can feel like tingling or electric shock or something like that, can be a useful thing to do. There's also a stretch that is somewhat useful if somebody's having back pain with shooting pain down their leg, which is there's a couple ways to do it. I'm going to try and demonstrate it, which is going to be a little bit difficult with the Zoom here. But basically, if you stand in a doorway and let's see. What I'm doing with my legs is bending my knees slightly, lifting one leg, and putting that ankle just above the other knee, and then going into as deep of a bend as possible with the knees while keeping the back straight. That is one way to stretch out the piriformis muscle, which is in the pelvic area and which often squeezes the sciatic nerve. So if it's shooting down that leg, that's the leg you want to bend and put up on the other knee, and then go into the deeper knee bend. If somebody can't do that standing up, if they're not able to support their weight, it's possible to do the same thing laying down. It's not really possible to do it correctly while sitting. At least it's very difficult to. Because you want to keep the back straight. You don't want to bend the lower back. But if they're laying on a flat surface, it might be possible for them to do that by bringing their knee up towards their chest. Might also be possible for them to do that assisted with someone slowly moving their leg for them. But you do have to be careful if you're moving somebody else's body like that you go very slowly and stop if they say it's starting to hurt. But that is a really good stretch that sometimes can do what medicines and internal things don't, because it's going to just sort of release that sciatic nerve from impingement. And that's a really helpful thing to be able to do. Is that hard for the knee to do while standing? It depends on your knees, and it also depends on how much you weigh, and what the muscle strength is like in the muscles of the leg. So for some people it might be, and for some people it isn't. So yeah, but it's something that I would have someone do in a doorway where they're braced on either side so that they're not just going to fall over. But they're able to put their arms on either side of the doorway and hold on to it, so that they have a little bit of support, or do it laying down. Like I said, that's another way to do that, especially laying on a hard flat surface, like laying on the floor or on a yoga mat or something like that might be a good way to do that for some people. But that kind of opens up that whole lower back area, but especially the lower back and the glutes and the pelvic floor can all get kind of opened up and stretched a little bit by doing that stretch. Do that in the stretching and core classes. Yeah. And I mean, stretching and core work is really helpful for back pain. So for also really can help with the nerve stuff. It can help with the muscular stuff, and it can help with the skeletal stuff. It's not going to help a lot all at once, but it can be good to strengthen those things. Strengthening and stretching is really, really good for preserving the health of the back, and trying to rehabilitate it. So yeah, it's a good thing to do. So let's see if I left anything. Yeah, so sleep, diet, stretching and strengthening, getting appropriate exercise, working and resting in an ergonomically feasible way is really important too. Trying to be mindful of that area of your body and not put a lot of stress on it is useful. External methods like the warming salve or like cupping also helpful. And then decreasing inflammation and supporting whichever structures and functions of the lower back need supported are all, kind of the general strategies for that sort of thing. Any questions about any of that? I occasionally have people refer people to me from UK, but not very often, really. Strangely enough, I do a lot of work with pain management, but most of the people who come to see me just come in from word of mouth from other people who have come in to see me.
Right.
And it's a thing that herbal medicine is really good for, because there are a lot of choices for pain and they're really well tolerated. And whereas you only take so many ibuprofens in a day, and you can only really take so many oxycodones in your life before they start doing more harm than good.
Right.
You can just about as much ginger as you feel like, and you can take just about as much turmeric or violet syrup or whatever as you feel like. So it's really, and that's a lot of the time what people with pain need is something that they can just use as needed and not have to self-limit and not have to suffer through a lot of pain with.
Okay.
Okay, so there's a question of, when combining turmeric with other types of anti-inflammatory herbs, about how many parts of each do you like? So I will usually have my extremely well-tolerated herbs, which I will do in equal parts. And that might be things like turmeric and ginger. And then I will have my medium dose ones that I will usually do in about half to a fourth as much of the formula. And then I usually have some low dose ones that I would use only in small amounts or would use separately by drop doses, depending on the individual herbs that I'm talking about. So for example, got the really gnarly stuff over here. Belladonna. I don't use that very much. It is a very strong pain herb. And if I'm using it, I'm using like 1 to 2 drops at a time. I usually would send somebody home with a 10 milliliter bottle and tell them use 1 to 3 drops of it. And I wouldn't combine that with another formula because, you know, I want people to have something like the ginger and turmeric. And a lot of the time I use ginger, curcuma, and pipsissewa together. For example, that's one of my favorite anti-inflammatory combinations. And with that, I'm using half as much pipsissewa as the other two. So if I were making 5 ounces of it, for instance, I might use 2 ounces of turmeric, 2 ounces of ginger, and 1 ounce of pipsissewa. Sometimes I would use trillium as well, and I would use 1 ounce of that as well. So yeah, it just kind of depends on what the herbs are and how well tolerated they are. But a lot of the time, yeah, I'll have my like kind of basic ones that I'll use a certain amount of, and then I'll use half as much of the sort of more medium dose ones. And the medium dose ones are not necessarily things that are like very toxic or anything like that. Like willow, for instance. Willow is something that I don't like people to just take. Like I'm fine with somebody taking as much ginger as they want. But willow, you want to take in somewhat smaller doses. It's not gonna, it can be harsh on your stomach, for instance, if you take too much of it. So yeah, it's usually something like that. But it differs a lot from person to person. I kind of make every formula up as I go. That's not entirely right because there are things that I do, you know, over and over again, like what I just described with ginger and turmeric and pipsissewa. But it's not like I've ever decided in advance that that's what I'm going to give somebody if they're in pain. I just feel like, okay, that feels like it fits. So yeah, it just kind of depends on what the herbs are and what the pain is. But generally speaking, I have, you know, low dose herbs, and then you have medium dose herbs that I'll use about half as much of, and then I'll have you know, anything that needs to be, I mean, the high dose herbs, and then the medium dose ones, and then if there's something that needs to be low dose or drop dose type of thing, I would often put that in a separate container. I don't usually like to give people things like that to take home unless I've worked with them a lot, because I don't want somebody to, you know, feel like they can just mess around with the dosage. And if I'm not sure that they're not going to do that, then I won't send them home with low dose herbs, but I will give them to them in the clinic. With belladonna, a lot of the time I use that topically as well. And it can be a good thing to use topically because it helps to relax muscles. Yeah, the belladonna teething tablets, they usually contain very, very small amounts of belladonna, but they're pretty popular. There's a question of, do I ever work with capsules of powdered ginger, turmeric, etc.? Sometimes I do, yeah. I don't do capsules as much as liquids because they're a little harder to, I mean, they're just kind of more labor intensive to put together for people. But, you know, they can be a useful way to get things into people's bodies, especially if it's somebody that, you know, wants to completely avoid alcohol or something like that. A lot of people don't like tasting the liquids either, which Capsules can be good for that. All right. So, any other questions about those herbs or about back pain? Well, I'd like to just kind of encourage everybody to get outside in this terrible wintry weather that we've been having. If you're in this, well, really, it's not even just this part of the country. It's actually a really huge chunk of the country that's had some intense weather this week. But just like at any other time, it's a good time to get out in the natural world and kind of reflect on it and see what's different under these circumstances. And, you know, one thing that you might notice is that in spite of how intense the conditions are out there, there are still plants growing. There's still a lot of stuff sprouting and coming up, even under the snow in some places. And the animals are still foraging, still finding food, and, you know, life is finding a way, even in the harshest of conditions. Can you decoct turmeric and keep it in the fridge for later? Yeah, you can. It'll keep for several days if you make a decoction of it. So yeah, it's definitely not something you have to make right on the spot. If you wanted to make, you know, a week's worth up and take it throughout the week, it'll last about that long if you keep it refrigerated. All right. Well, any other questions for today? In that case, thank you all very much for coming, and I will talk to you next Tuesday.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
See
you
you
so
next-
much.
Good night.
Hi, balls.